Thank you. All right. Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Is this, are we okay?
What?
It's a tough crowd already. I'm going home. Well, it is terrific to be here. Do you notice a few new things going on here? How about that? A round of applause for the Indian Harbor Yacht Club. Thank you. And also to Dan, our videographer, for getting this figured out and connecting the dots. So thank you all. It's a bit of a work in process, so pardon us if a few things don't quite work right today, but we're excited. We'll find out whether or not the font size I use on my pictures will work for the back rows, so bear with us. Who's here for the first time? We always want to welcome our new friends and guests. Welcome, a handful of you, just delighted to have you here. You may wonder, what have you gotten yourself into? Whoever invited you, why did you come to this crazy crowd? Well, here's what we're about. We just ask one simple thing, and we say this at the start of every GLF. We ask, what does this Bible that we look at on Sunday, if we're not sleeping in or playing golf or tennis or something, have to do with this Bible that we read and follow Monday through Saturday? Do these two things have anything to do with each other? Well, a lot of people say no. They live bifurcated, compartmentalized lives. And if they make it to church or synagogue or whatever in the weekend, they give it their best shot. But then this is what really dictates Monday through Friday. Well, GLF suggests that no, in fact, the Bible, both Testaments, the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament, are all about life at its whole and the marketplace in particular. So we like to think of the metaphor that the Bible serves as a set of train tracks or parameters to help guide and steer our ethical behavior and our leadership in the marketplace. We also want to suggest it's not easy. It takes a lot of work. And that's why we come together month after month after month to try to, on the one hand, underpin ourselves and keep us in the straight and narrow and not become the next statistic we read about, but also to encourage us and to motivate us. We approach these questions out of the Christian tradition, but we welcome people from any and all and no tradition to be yourselves and use the language whatever you're comfortable with. So that's what you've come to, and I hope you enjoy yourself. We have two modes, as Michael was mentioning. One mode is where we'll interview someone. We'll have a victim, and sometimes we have a teaching session. And this is one of our sort of interactive teaching sessions that we'll talk about. I will tell some stories, and I'll tell you what they're going to be about, and look for you to jump in, ask questions, or challenge as we go along. And hopefully we'll have some fun. So I'm also experimenting with a new clicker, so I don't get blinded now like I've been for the projector and the screen. So a little quiz. What was yesterday?
Veterans Day.
That's right. What Veterans Day used to be called?
Armistice Day.
And what are the key numbers?
11, 11, 11.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I asked the same question yesterday afternoon. I was up at Yale. The Yale School of Management invited me to come and speak with them. And some of our nation's best and brightest future MBA students that you're all going to be hiring as a corporate governance class. I'll talk about it in a minute. I asked that question. There was about 50 people in the room, and there was silence.
Wow.
And finally, one person said Veterans Day, and a few people nodded. And then I said, what did it used to be called? No idea. I said, did the numbers 11 mean anything to you? No. And I showed this picture. Does that mean anything to you? And we don't do that as much in this country, as you know, but for those of you who've been to Canada, the UK, the poppy fields, that they all wear these as a reminder. How many folks here, either themselves or family members, have served in the armed forces? Yeah. Thank you all. It's something to be proud of, and I thank you all for that and your families. So, yeah. That's the answer, which you all knew, which means you don't have to go get an MBA now because you all are confident.
It means we're old.
But you remember that you're old, which is good. I don't know. So, for those of you who have been here before, these were a couple of the interviewees we had. In fact, Kurt, we're delighted to have you here as just a regular guy attendee today. So thanks for coming and being part of it. And both their talks are on the website. We're now webcasting these, and really each were terribly moving conversations. And many people came away with nuggets and ideas and inspiration that will change their business lives. So we thank those people for doing that. Today we're going to talk a little bit about road stories, and our December session will be Christmas at Work. So, some of you know, and I mentioned a couple of emails, I've been on the road a little bit this past month. These are the places I've been going. So what do these cities all have in country, all these places have in common?
You went there.
Well, good man. Actually, I needed a passport to go to every one of these places.
Especially Nashville.
Texas, I got screened coming in, I didn't have a visa, Tennessee. So,
Except for New Haven, they're all foreign countries.
some would argue. So I thought, some of you were chatting, maybe what I would do is I'd tell a little bit of what I observed, why I went to some of these places, and this isn't about me, but things I heard other people say, and to tell you some of those stories. And if there's an overarching theme to what I'm about to share, and we'll invite your questions, if there's an overarching theme, it's on the one hand, some of these places are just so incredibly different than here in the Northeast, frankly, whether it's Nashville or Beijing, particularly Beijing, but they're just so incredibly different. And on the other hand, there's some things that are so incredibly the same. Looked at either through the lens of commerce and business and finance, and looked at through the lens of faith. So let's see what some of these things are. I thought I'd start close to home with where I was yesterday. Does somebody know the name Ira Milstein? He's now, 83 or 84 years old, a legend in the corporate governance field. And you can see his title here, and there's the Milstein Center for Corporate Governance at Yale. And he invited me to come up and talk about the role of faith and ethics. The title he said he gave my talk was Doing the Right Thing. All the people who've been coming have been outside speakers, former chairman of the SEC, and a bunch of others. But he asked me specifically to come and talk about the role of religion or faith. You could have heard a pin drop in that class. I would say if you look at a bell curve, about 20% of the students thought, this is nuts. You must be joking. This has no place at work. About 20% said, at last, someone is validating something that's central to who I am. My faith makes me tick. And whether they're a Jew or a Christian or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's central to who they are. And then sort of that middle group saying, whoa, I just never thought about this. This is kind of strange. When we talked, it was extraordinary. I put forward a couple case studies. One case study was a real story that one executive once shared with me about underwriting essentially whether or not to take on a big piece of pornographic business that was perfectly legal, but a little bit distasteful to some people. And I've unpacked the fact pattern in the class and asked them what they would do, what did they think. So I said, how many, since it's perfectly legal and very lucrative business, how many without a second thought would say, yeah, of course we should take it? And 3 hands went up. And I said, how many without a second thought think, well, you shouldn't take it because you find something repugnant with it? And about 3 hands went up. And everyone else was in the middle. Everyone else. So what do you make of that?
Not enough extremists.
Peer pressure in the room.
Big peer pressure. You're right. Just sort of stand up and take a stance on something.
We're doing a better job of teaching management we are values.
Yeah, better about management and values. What struck me is that's a lot of the workplaces you're dealing with, isn't it? Maybe even you and me sometimes. What are the things that we intuitively know we're going to stand up for? And then how do we stand up in a way that's effective and not some holier than thou or self-righteous kind of person, which frankly just turns everybody off? How do you raise questions of morality, questions of ethics, when everyone else is afraid to raise them? So here's some of our nation's best and brightest, and the vast majority of that people in the room, perhaps peer pressure, didn't quite know how to start the conversation.
I
Charlie?
think it goes even beyond that to, okay, so this business, this hypothetical business, what's its purpose? Its purpose is to maximize profits. How then do I apply my personal values to something that is otherwise legal on behalf of that business? It's a very complex question.
Yeah, and then it started coming out in the conversation, and one of them said, who is it for business to moralize? And I said, well, on one level you're right, but don't companies do that every day? What do you mean? Well, every company picks what businesses are going to go into and out of, what clients are going to take or not take, or not take. I said, can you think of what the one person was arguing for? As long as it's legal and it helps shareholder return, he had no issue with it at all. And when I pressed, I said, can you think of any issue that any type of business you wouldn't take, if it were legal for some reason? And he said he wouldn't go have anything to do with drugs. I said, well, we've just now agreed that there are some places you're going to moralize. And now it's a question of figuring out what they are and how we talk about them as organizations.
What might help in this context is there's more and more risk management techniques that try to quantify what the ethical cost might be. So it's not just a straight business case, how much more revenue, market share, or cash flow, but you get a better cost quantification. You know, this type of not so ethical behavior might cost you so much, so that comes into the decision-making process.
Exactly. And what came in the conversation, it's the same thing that happened in all of your offices. Once you put the topic on the table, you begin having a healthy, free-flowing conversation where pluses and minuses come out, the realities, so it gets good and messy. And sooner or later, we got to, and I know Jerry Du Bois thought a lot about this question of reputational risk. How you monetize, how you quantify reputational risk. And do you want to be known as being in certain businesses? Maybe you do, maybe it's not a big deal, or maybe you don't. But these are the questions which then started coming out of what became a very informed and mature and wonderful conversation. Yeah.
I think the whole area of ethics is more insidious. Generally, you have people that get to the top of corporations, they're very successful. They've been successful since they were this much. In high school, through high school, they got into the best colleges, they succeeded there. They were told, you went to Harvard, you went to Yale, you went to, you're the best. You are on top. They got into corporations, and they generally rocketed through corporate. So they were the best. They were the best in business, and they're respected in their communities. They're the best. Now a situation comes along in business where the numbers are not going to make it. I've been successful all my life. I'm not going to fail. I can't fail. You start putting the pressure on people around them. And then it gets more and more and more intense, whether you're moving up numbers or whatever the case. They just can't fail. And so there's a disconnect between that time frame and when they were in college, give them an ethics course. There's 30 years in between those things. You should give them the ethics courses and try to build that. But there's such a pressure around them, and that's why it becomes very, very difficult. Most people can deal with it. There are a few that just can't.
Well, and the reality is the world is going to have more pressure, not less.
That's right.
So how do we develop systems and disciplines and practices, including like what we do here at GLF, to equip us to handle these times of deep stress? One quick question, and we'll go to the next one.
I think more comment. I think it's very important to think about this ahead of time when you post a theoretical case. You could start off and you wind up in a reactive kind of posture, like Amazon is doing now with its pedophilia book.
Right.
And so it's like the reaction you lure that we've seen played out on CNN these days,
Yeah.
which is probably not how one wants to approach it.
No, you're right. To the extent that companies can anticipate and look around the corner and say, what are the issues that are going to be happening in our industry or are happening today, that in the past we haven't really had to worry about, but today with everyone having a webcam, everyone being able to capture things, there are no secrets anymore. And there are channels to get these voices out that didn't exist. So likewise, how do people faith think about that? And practice is a good part, which is kind of what we're trying to do. So, oh, well, you're not going to be able to read this, but this is a cartoon I showed the students, and they weren't sure whether to laugh or not at this. It's a couple farmers with a bunch of well-dressed young men and women, and the caption reads, "In 6 more weeks, these MBAs will be ready for market." Give them a little more grain, a little more cooking. It was a little nervous chocolate. So by the way, obviously these are terrific kids, but as you are hiring these terrific young men and women, you probably have more of a role in coaching and teaching them on ethics than maybe you thought before. In fact, Ira said to me, David, this class has disturbed me. Well, you know, I'm sorry, did I not do a good job? I said, no, you did a terrific job, and that's why it's disturbed. He said, I keep telling everyone, you always know what the right thing is, just do the right thing. I said, Ira, you're 84. You've developed, in the era you grew up in, there were some clear parameters of what was right and wrong. The world's a little different now. Plus you've had all these decades of seasoning. You kind of have gotten to a stage where you do know the right thing. But I'll wager a lot of our best and brightest who are 25, 26, 27, they may not know what the right thing is. And they're good people, it's not like they're bad people, but they don't have that instinct. It was a little unsettling, and he came away realizing that we do have to, from training, how we think ethically, how we think ethically. And what role we actually here can play. So here we go. I went to the great state of Tennessee, Nashville. There's a small little university there called Lipscomb University. It's a Christian college. Extraordinary little place, what they're doing. And they have just founded the Dean Institute for Corporate Governance and Integrity, founded by an Ernst & Young, their former head of Ernst & Christian Young, who's founded this place. They had an award, a sort of fundraising dinner going. I was their speaker for that. And they gave an award to Jack Boventer. Some of you may know he had been the head of HCA, and HCA and Columbia had a merger, complete disaster. And then he was brought back in to clean it up because he was known as a top ethical person. So I gave a talk there on some of my observations about ethics in the marketplace and faith in particular, because they wanted to know about faith in particular and ethics. So I did that. But then this is really embarrassing. You know, so I don't know why I'm telling you this. So who here knows who Amy Grant is? Okay, I didn't. So do you know who's Amy Grant? Tell everyone who doesn't know.
She's a very popular Christian singer.
Yeah, very popular Christian singer, right? Like Catherine Barron, right? And everyone has their Christmas album. It's sort of like the Bing Crosby album of our time. And Jerry, you and me, baby. So Amy's there presenting the award to Jack Boventer.
She was there, you didn't know she was
I know, I'm kind of, as you noticed from the earlier music, I'm kind of a rock and roll guy, so I had my Grateful Dead going, and my Jackson Browne and all, so that was a little embarrassing. And then afterwards, she came up, and it's very, very nice lady. She said, I just want to tell you, that was just the most moving talk. I went, thank you. And she had these powerful comments herself, so we're having this nice little, sort of clicked and we're talking. And so I said, so what do you do? When she was giving her remarks to give the award to Jack Boventer, she said, and this should have been my clue, she said, I've never really done something like this before. I'm not used to giving formal speeches. If I could only have done it in a song, it would have been easy. So I missed my clue. So we visited and had a great old time. Her sister was with her, and she is, I've come to learn, you all obviously know, she was one of the first sort of Christian music stars that was a successful crossover artist in sort of mainstream music as well, non-Christian music. And she's a terrific person. You know, a lot of these people are prima donnas, and she was just really wonderful. So she said, so you like music? I said, yeah. And she goes, well, my husband's playing over at a little club nearby tonight. Do you want to go? And I go, well, that's sure. I was sort of keyed up, had a little energy. That sounds great. It's a place called The Station Inn. It's a sort of a dive club in Nashville where all the hot acts go, like a small elite dive club place. So I said, sure. So what's his name? Now does anyone, and she said, Vince. Yeah, and I said, Vince who? So I looked at her husband saying, Vince Gill. And I said, what's he do? And she said, bartender, right? So I go over to the club, and it's closed, it's locked, and I talk my way into it. And I say to the bouncer, I said, Amy Grant told me her husband is playing here tonight. Can I come in? And he was like, what? Anyway, so and then I asked the bartender, I said, excuse me, is Vince Gill up there? She said, yes. And I said, what instrument is he playing? She said, actually, at first I said, this may be a stupid question, but what instrument? And she said, that is a stupid question. So there he is, and a real nice guy. So anyway, that was Nashville. But you should embarrass yourself and be. I'll let me count the ways. So, basically, what I'm going to try to do is show some slides and pictures I took, and each one of them is a bit of a story behind them. And I'll tell each of the stories, then just invite you to sort of pause and comment if you have questions or want me to follow up. I'm not going to pause and comment anymore in Nashville because that's clear my problems there. So it started, the background of the trip. I was invited, the initial reason for the trip was there's something called the Center for International Business Ethics in Beijing. Center for International Business Ethics in Beijing, and they were hosting a conference called A Values-Based Economy for China and the World. A Values-Based Economy for China and the World. So it's sort of interesting. Values is a powerful euphemism, and for China and the world, so China's very sensitive to being sort of singled out. They openly and freely talked about corruption as a massive problem. They know that's an issue, so it's publicly being talked about. And they invited a group of international scholars, Chinese scholars. It was hosted with Peking University and another university. So there's scholars there, some business executives, Western and Chinese CEOs, and the Communist Party officials taking good notes. So that was what brought me over, and I'll tell a little bit about that. What I did is I added a few days on at the beginning, and through some friends I had here in the States and some network, I wanted to go visit some of what's called the underground church in China. There's, as you probably all know, there's the official church called the Three Self Church. There's an official Catholic church, which the Pope doesn't actually recognize, but there's a Catholic church, there's a Protestant church, which are fully permitted by government, where they have to register and they have oversight. But the underground church is just exploding, or house churches, it's sometimes called. And I'll share a little about that, because I have the privilege of going to a few Chinese house churches and meetings with them that were talking about faith and work, and then a few expats that I visited with. So, so I don't forget it, I've got here Pax Romana. Does anyone sort of remember that phrase in your history? Pax Romana, to the peace of Rome. There was this period around the time of Christ and after his death, crucifixion, and resurrection, that sort of 100-year window where, by and large, the world, the civilized world as we knew it then, was fairly peaceful, because Rome was in charge, the Roman Empire. And they built roads, so there was thoroughfares, there was highways, airplanes. You could get places through these amazing roads. It was a fairly peaceful, relatively speaking, time for commerce. I'm not a scholar of history, but I half wonder if we're maybe now in a Pax Romana, another 100-year period like existed in the 1st and 2nd century. And sure, we've got wars and conflicts, we know that. But any one of you can, and many of you do, get on a plane this afternoon and go to Beijing, or to Shanghai, or to Myanmar. We can go to places anywhere in the world as business people and have conversations that missionaries can't have. Sort of official, old-fashioned missionaries. So it's a fascinating time where I think the gospel of Christian faith is going around the world, largely being transferred or transported by business people. The conversations aren't just what you might think of talking about salvation and eternal life and soul. Those are not unimportant things, but they're also talking about integrity and business ethics and how do I carry myself in the marketplace. The very kind of questions we wrestle with here. So I park that as a big thought. Are we in a Pax Romana right now? The numbers officially in China, there's supposed to only be like 30 or 40 million Christians. Unofficially, all the estimates for people who study this, a lot more than me, said it's probably about 100 million Christians in China, and it's growing like wildfire. So this is one of the house groups I met with. We met in a restaurant, interestingly. I kind of was expecting we'd be all locked in a basement somewhere. but one of my false impressions of China is, and I've been there before, like I'm sure many of you have, but things have really changed in the past few years. There is a lot more openness to things. The Chinese government is not as afraid of Christians and Christianity as it used to be, because they've come to realize, and some very senior officials have come to the States and studied this and gone back and said that Christians are law-abiding people. They contribute to society. They're ethical. They're not corrupt. Now, we all know we have hypocrisy, we have our bad sheep, we have our problems. But in the main, it's an ethos which is carried. I asked them, what do Chinese people worship? And I thought they might say Confucius or something, or some other sort of spiritual traditions. And they said, no, money. And there's a huge moral vacuum in China right now. And they will admit, this isn't just me as an outsider sort of pontificating. They will admit there's a huge values vacuum. They don't know where to turn. After whatever it is, 40, 50 years of official atheism, and we all know laws don't make people moral or ethical. We know that. And we need laws, but they don't make people ethical. We need some deeper, transcendent metaphysical source and motivation. And these people are hungry for that. So we went and had a private room in a restaurant. There were about 20 of us. That seems to be the magic number. If you get much more than 20 people, they start getting nervous because you don't have freedom of assembly like here. And you can't just have like a big demonstration, even if you're just singing songs. So we had 20, and we sat around these round tables in this restaurant, and you could see maybe in the middle, it looks like a pot, like a massive wok there. And these ladies kept coming and throwing different things in there. And I concluded I will eat anything that's given to me unless it's moving. And they were moving things in this. But they started moving, and by the end I guess they weren't, but it was delicious food. Now none of them, this is something that surprised me. You go to a lot of countries and young entrepreneurs, young educated people are fluent in English, or at least conversant. I don't speak Mandarin, I speak a different language, not Mandarin. And so when there was two people who were translators for us, so it was a lot of, as you all know, when you're in these settings, of smiling and laughing and pointing and hoping to have someone translate, which we did. But we pointed a couple of people and tell some stories. So this man, he actually on his business card is using an Anglo name. And what name did he choose? It doesn't speak a word of English. Luke. Luke. A lot of the Christians will pick a biblical first name that they have. Luke used to be employed in a company. He's recently started a photography business, a videography. So Dan, this is you. And so we had a Q&A. I made some comments and there's a Q&A. So his question was, Professor Miller, what do I do when someone wants me, I'm struggling, I'm just trying to make my business, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm just starting. What do I do when someone comes to me and wants me to take a photograph as part of like the logo for their business of an idol? I didn't even understand the question. I thought it was a language thing. I'm thinking like teen idol, like what's he talking? So no, like the Bible, an idol. Oh, like a false idol, as in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not have any false images or graven images. And I said, let's say a bit more. And he said, well, he wants me to take a picture of, this one person wanted to have a picture of the Buddha, and another person wanted a picture of a lion. And in Chinese culture, the lion is also sort of a mythic figure, sort of a god figure. And I thought, have I ever heard an American executive ask about a false idol and what business we take on or don't take on? Now, I'm not saying he was right or wrong, or that we're right or wrong, but the purity, the desire of his faith to have it be so clean was very moving to me. And we talked about it and ended up having a fascinating conversation. And we talked about idols in general, the idol of money or false idols, as well as these visual graven images. But he was looking at the graven image and wondering whether he would be a bad Christian if he took this on as his business profile. His solution, by the way, he was uncomfortable with it, and I said, where do you think you're going to go? His solution was to suggest a different image to his client that was more in keeping with what their mission was. So, great. This person here, I can't remember her name, with the Universal Peace sign. She was a Mary Kay cosmetic representative. So figure. And by the way, that whole tiered marketing initially was deeply suspect in China because it was viewed as being essentially a Ponzi scheme. And they've worked their way through it, so the government is finally allowing Tupperware and Mary Kay and a few other businesses to do this. And that's how a lot of people are lifting themselves out of poverty. By the way, based on whatever numbers you look at, some 400 million people through the marketplace, through various forms of capitalism, have lifted themselves out of abject poverty in the past couple of decades. Extraordinary numbers. That was my translator. He was used to be an executive with Google. His nickname went by Sonny was his name. And Sonny is now starting up his own high-tech firm and has 40 employees, and it's growing like gangbusters, sort of a special software server. Some people say the Chinese are just copiers, they're not innovators. I mean, yes, they are copiers, and yes, the huge issue of stealing our intellectual property, the whole IP thing is a huge issue. But they're also innovating too, so watch out. Here's what he said though, and this guy could have been in this room. He said, you know, I am working so hard, so many hours to be able to have a nice car and the nice things for my family, but sometimes I wonder, is it worth it all? I am just consumed by my business. And that's before I even get into issues of corruption and not playing the game like everybody else plays the game. How do I hold it all together? And we talked about he said his faith was the only thing that was helping make sense to him, because he felt he had purpose in this company to help people's lives improve. But he was struggling deeply. I mean, how many of us sometimes say, why are you doing this? Can't we just get off the train for a little while and slow down? So there's some problems of being a successful driving person are universal. And his faith was both challenging him on the one hand and encouraging him on the other. So that's the fish I ate on the left. But let me just pause. Any comments about these Chinese young men and women who are business people?
How did they come to faith?
Great question. How they come to faith? I asked a few of them, and it was all by someone telling, what I call telling them the story. And many of them started also with an act of vacuum and emptiness in their life. That they literally are worshiping money. That's all everyone wants to do is get rich. And the model is get your university degree in China, go to the US for an MBA, get your ticket punched there, but you come back and you start a business and then you clean up. And they're finding that there's an emptiness even with the material success. I mean, they're all enjoying being wealthy as opposed to poor. And then invariably, it's someone telling the story to them. Someone saying, I think I have an answer to the emptiness in their life. Yeah.
There's so many young people doing this, and so many young Christians. Who is mentoring them? I mean, who is stepping, who's been ahead of that road a little bit before them? How do they grow their faith? How do they come together and build their faith?
Yeah, because in your heart, these young Christians get mentored. You know, in a way, it's probably one of the problems. There's not a lot of, I'm reluctant to use the word mature Christian, young Christian, but if you know what I mean, someone who's been working at it for much of their life, and of course every year we get a little wiser and we stub our toes, we'll get a little bit smarter. And there's not a lot of those quote-unquote mature Christians. There are many Americans who have come over who are involved with these groups, many Westerners who are business people in their own right, who spend time. There are several churches in the U.S. I came to learn that are very big on spreading the faith in China. So many, like one person I'll talk about in a minute, he actually, I asked, how did you come to faith? He was, he worked for Nestle's. So a big conglomerate, obviously, and he was probably about 32, 33. He said, well, I'm from the Boston branch. And I thought he meant Nestle's, but there's a church in Boston which has been planting churches in China, and he ties his lineage back to Boston. It's sort of bizarre, but yeah.
Did you get any sense of how Christianity is growing in Hong Kong, where it can be, worshipped openly?
You know, we didn't talk about that as much, but my sense is there it's also exploding too.
Well, China, a lot of the young people are basically rebelling against the false idol of communism. And that's been part of the process of opening the mind, etc. My family's had a long history in China as missionaries going back to 1867. And a lot of these, it's like a lot of people, people are searching for answers that aren't available in the official process. And that's how a lot of Christianity grew in China.
And with the freedom to search now, to be sure, there are huge restrictions, but there are less restrictions than we think in the West.
Right.
So there is freedom for people to have these conversations.
So why do some of these people that you were with, why do they choose, you spoke to, I think, as the underground church, why do they go there, and what do they say about the more official church? Because I assume that the official churches are teaching something like what we would consider mainstream Christianity. So why do they go one or the other?
You know, why, maybe for the same reasons in this country, some of us will be drawn to one kind of church versus another kind of church. So some of that, I think, is just natural instincts. But I think that those who are in the underground church feel that ultimately the official Three Self Church is supervised, it's controlled, and they don't like that, that they feel the church should be free of any human or any sort of governmental interference. So it's, they probably view it as a more pure Christian experience as opposed to one that's tainted by communist oversight, party oversight. Morning.
Did they talk about what disciplines they have for strengthening their faith in an environment that's so counter?
They did, and I was struck by and frankly embarrassed by my poor practices. They're profoundly serious prayers. They pray a lot. Early in the morning, they're intense prayers. Believe in the power of prayer for their own personal disciplines as well as what theologians call the efficacy of prayer. They believe prayer works, and not just for some lip service thing.
Is the Mormon church active in China?
Yeah, Mormon Church active. I didn't encounter any on this, but they're there as well, big time. Yeah.
I mean, the Western world, we tend to have a bit of seasonal agenda, Easter, Christmas, and whatever, so we all a bit those patterns, but these home-driven churches, how do they set the agenda? Do they just experience and deal with the daily life issues?
My sense was there's less of a liturgical calendar, like we might have sort of the rhythms of the church year and the colors and the festive. I think they're just still reading the Bible and working on the parables and the stories. They're also reading, actually, I kept finding Tim Keller books popping up. For those of you who know Tim Keller, a pastor of Redeemer Press in New York City, they're reading, they're hungry for books. There's also Bill Pollard's book that he wrote on the soul of the firm about a service master experience. That's been translated. They're reading that. There's a guy named John Beckett who owns Beckett Manufacturing in Ohio. They make boilers, and John's a very committed Christian and views work as ministry. They're reading his book that's been translated. So a lot of the texts they're reading are coming from business people who've had their stories translated, and people like Tim Keller, and they're reading this very carefully.
A simple logistical question. I assume you don't speak any form of Chinese, but who speaks English there? And I'm thinking demographic and age. Is it young people speak English, or well educated, or is that?
To be sure, the younger people are speaking English more than older people, but the amount of people, like in the basic service sector, like the hotel I was staying in kind of a mid-level hotel, mid to lower level hotel, and no one spoke any English there at all. I mean, nothing in the menus was even translated. So it's an interesting thing. But English, those who are trying to learn English, certainly it's a ticket forward, there's no doubt about it. And many of them try to work for a Western company. And of course, you need to speak English to do that.
Statistics saying that 250 million people are learning English in China.
250.
Almost the same population here.
Yeah.
That's only a fifth of the population.
Yeah, I mean, the whole numbers are just staggering. And we all know this, but many of you have been there, but just sort of seeing it live. So on the one hand, I came away really uplifted, and on the other hand, just really sort of stunned with everything that's going on.
I would like to share a story. I would make it really short. In this last year, I do a lot of business in China, have been there for years, and we had a situation where a very senior government official was coming to the United States for a 2 or 3 day set of meetings, and he brought his wife. His wife was not a government official, but she is from one of the wealthiest families in China.
Which is saying a lot.
And they're very wealthy, and she acted as the interpreter. So the long story short, we went through 3 days worth of meetings, and at the end of the meeting, it became well known that they wanted to play golf. So we met for 3 days, intense meetings, and the last day we were playing golf. On the second hole, they asked if what part religion played in my life, which was a stunning question.
Yeah.
And so I told them, so we went into the lunch, and I saw that they went over to the side and they started talking to each other. And that pretty soon they came and said, "What are you doing at 2 o'clock this afternoon?" I said, "I haven't got any plans. I'm going back to the office." And they said, "We got married a number of years ago in China, and we couldn't get married in a church because of my husband's position in the government. But we're getting married at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we decided that we wanted you to be the best man." I might have to slip home and get a suit. So they asked my son and I, and we went. We were the only Americans there, and I held the ring, and my son was the witness, and the two of them came. And so we went to this church. They had rented a little church out by the airport at JFK, but it was a very classy, little, absolutely perfect New England church, and they had the minister lined up, and they had an organizer that organized it. We walked in, and I thought they would probably be in the clothes, and she was in a magnificent wedding gown, and he was in pails. And we went through the service, and it was a Christian service. And
did they ask you to preach?
No, but they obviously took all kinds of pictures and then sent all the wedding pictures back. But the upshot of that is that we do many trips in China, and I would say, and many of them around dinner, and I would say almost always religion comes up. almost always an out of curiosity. And the breaking point isn't our missionaries going over there to get them converted. I don't think that's the driving force. I think the value they put on A, family, B, education, and C is the explosion of technology and their access to everything. They're very tuned in to technology and can see this. So I think the subject you're bringing up is very alive. It's very robust. I think it's growing virally.
Yeah.
Not from us to them, but from them to us. So they are keenly interested in the subject of Christianity.
Hopefully you all heard that, but they're keenly interested at all levels, young folks as well as some of the most wealthy and affluent. And one quick story, I'm blanking on the guy's name, but it's one of the chief economists or senior economists from the Communist Party who sent over to the United States to understand, well, why is it the United States, by and large, is a pretty ethical place and has been so successful? And the person came and studied and liked de Tocqueville and like Weber and others before him, came up and realized that while these Christian values and these Jewish Christian traditions really have shaped this country and our values and our sense of right and wrong and finding meaning and purpose and work and so forth. And he came back and not only did this person who was an atheist conclude that was sort of, there's this utilitarian benefit, if you will, this practical benefit to the Christian faith. While he was here, he also became convinced of the veracity of the truth of the Christian claim that Jesus is who he said he was. And the person actually became a Christian. He goes back to China, tells the Communist Party, well, here's what I've found, that it's really the faith that has made this country amazing all these years. But I need to tell you something. I've actually now come to believe in that faith, and I don't know if I need to step down from the party or what the issue is. And I said, no, that's okay. I mean, so things are happening that are different that we wouldn't necessarily have thought of. It's an extraordinary time. In some ways, well, I don't know if this is fully accurate. I felt a full freedom to be who I was and not have to, in some ways, more restrained than I might feel if I were in a different party and branch. And I say that half playfully, but half to make the point. There's a curiosity, maybe that's a word, there's a curiosity, which then begs the question, how do you think all the people live? There's a curiosity here too, and how, I'm not comfortable talking about some of these things, but how do we learn to talk about these things and in some ways that invite a conversation that can change people's lives? One quick story, I just want to go back to this, realize this woman here, again, I can't remember her name, she, her story, she worked in a textile firm as doing what we would call sort of sweatshop labor. Somehow she managed to save up enough capital to start her own. She and her husband now have a business where they have a textile firm. I said, well, how's it going? She said, well, it's tough. I said, why is it tough? She said, well, we honor our contracts. I said, well, no one else does. And I said, why do you do that? Because I'm a Christian. I can't lie, I just tell the truth. And she quotes to me, you pay a worker their just wages. And she said a lot of people working in these other big factories, they're promised X, but they're really not given X. Or they lose it through the company store, where they get caught in this debt cycle of having to buy things from the company store. And she's not doing that. But she looked at me like I was an idiot. I think, well, I'm a Christian, of course I can't do that. So a lot of times I felt like an idiot this past month. So that was some of the human stories meeting some of these people. Just a quick aside, this man here was, he's Hong Kong Chinese. He was the ombudsman when the British government transferred peacefully Hong Kong back to mainland China, and he told some fascinating stories. So, road stories. So here's one picture of a road. This is a part of China we maybe all think of, and here's another picture of China. And this one is growing. This was a Communist Party official car. You'll notice there wasn't a license plate, which brings me to the contents I've sent. Oh, one other thing, I visited with a few expats and spent time with groups not unlike this, where we met one in kind of coffee shop equivalent and another on the top floor of a financial district building that had this stunning view of smog. But it was a beautiful building, and there were men and women just like you who were trying to connect the dots. First of all, as you all know, if you've ever had an overseas posting, being an expat has its own challenges, and then in the country of China, additional challenges, and they were trying to hold together their work, their ethics. One very senior guy from IBM was saying, I think back my IBM career in the US, I've probably had maybe 5 or 6 really big ethical issues I've had to think about. Here I have 5 or 6 before noon every day. It's a whole different world, And how do you play at a different level. I mean, you know these things, granted, it's a different level. And I want to stress that I'm not trying to be holier than thou, we versus the Chinese, nor am I suggesting they're bad people, but it's a different ethos, a totally different ethos. And they're starting to realize their ethos isn't right, but it's a long, long haul. Let me just carry on. So this is now the conference that I was alluding to earlier. That was stunning. By the way, if any of you are interested in China Matters, I highly commend the book called The Party by Richard McGregor, who's a Financial Times journalist, lived in China for years. It's a terrific book, just called The Party, as in the Communist Party. I was told that's the best read if you're going to read one book before you go over and you're interested in business and things. So this was a conference, a values-based economy for China and the world. I was asked to talk on religion and business ethics. That was my title. And in particular, so I talked about religion in general, and then I sort of brought the funnel down and talked about the Christian religion, among others. Again, I spoke totally freely, without any inhibitions. It was all being simultaneously translated, published. It's going to be at a peer-reviewed ethics journal in China. There's a hunger for these sort of questions. So I was talked about the role that the Christian faith, in its best formulations, because we know we don't always get it right, how it shapes and forms ethical behavior, and how it can give meaning and purpose to people in their work, and how you treat your people, what kind of business you do and don't do, and how you do your business. There's a full crowd. This guy who never smiled was one of the sort of briefcase carriers for one of the senior communist officials. I love the guy. He had his game face on the whole time. He was making sure that we didn't do anything wrong. And every day, there was, by the way, it was fascinating. There was open, free discourse by and large, but every now and then one of the officials would stand up and sort of give out sort of the Communist Party line on things, and then they'd go back. And so there's this tension, this pressing between how far do you dare go in a public setting, and how far don't you go. The big phrase is the harmonious society, which many of you probably know. What's a harmonious society look like? The story was told, I meant to put I can't remember which premiere it was, but the story was told, this is the Chinese way of thinking on many things, is which is better, a black cat or a white cat? As far as catching mice. Answer, if they both catch mice equally well, it doesn't matter. And that's sort of Chinese sort of say, it doesn't matter. Well, I think a Christian worldview says, well, it does matter how you catch the mouse. How you operate your business matters. So there's a strong utilitarian drive there, and I would say we often have a utilitarian drive coupled with an ethical overlay. How we conduct our businesses matters. So we don't just do anything that it takes to get the job done. This man here was had been banished during the Cultural Revolution and had a pretty rough go of it for a couple of decades, and he's come back and is sort of a hero figure from the party. He manages one of their education institutes, and he made a surprise appearance and signed his book, and you could just see everyone there. It was like kind of a rock star. They all wanted to talk to him, get his handshake and his signature. This is back in Beijing, actually. It's hard to read this, I realize from the back, but it's a photograph of a plaque outside of a cemetery, a Christian cemetery, right in Beijing. And it's called the Cemetery of Mateo Ricci. You'll know Bishop. Anyone else know Mateo Ricci? Yeah, you might. Mateo Ricci, I'll just read it. He was an Italian missionary who came to China in 1582. Besides preaching, he also introduced Western science on astronomy, calendar, geography, and mathematics to the Chinese people. He was buried here in 1611 after his death, and the place later became the Cemetery of Foreign Missionaries in Beijing. And it goes, there are now 63 different tombstones here in this place in China. Each of those missionaries, so they're really acculturated themselves. It's sort of maybe the healthiest version or vision of a missionary, where they learn the language and contribute to the well-being of the society. I've never seen tombstones like this. These are all different priests. And if you look real closely, you'll see the sign of the cross with then all the commingled dragons around that. A little bit different than our regular. One guy I'll call Tom. He is an American expat. He's lived in China for 20 years. He's been the CEO of a couple of different U.S. firms. They're a Chinese operation. and he now is the CEO of a joint venture with the China firm. I can't mention his name or the firm, but he has a few 100,000 employees. And this man is trying to figure out how can he, within the construct of a harmonious society, bring his faith to bear in this place. Amazing. That's what he is thinking about. And he's obviously very, very good at his job, or he wouldn't have it. It's a firm we all know here in the States, a blue chip firm. And he is viewing this as his life work. He's the Matteo Ricci of our times. How does he change this place with the face of Christ? How do we do that appropriately? What's that look like? Fascinating stuff. So, it's positive. Any sort of questions on China or comments? Yeah.
A quick thing, just connect your first story about Yale to the China. Back in December 2006, they had a conference of 100 MBA program and deans of business schools who came out with a statement at the end of the conference saying that corporate social responsibility should be a major theme of business education in China. And you couldn't get 100 deans of U.S. business schools to sign on to that. I don't think. So they are trying to get the integrated into the business teaching that they're coming up with over there somehow. And that's part of that is code for, again, like the social responsibility of Christian churches of trying to put ethics into what they're doing, as opposed to just, worshiping the remedy.
Well, and China is a study in contradictions, because there are some industries and technology sectors that are just leapfrogging ours as far as some clean energy things, which are stunning. And then you turn around and see a devastation on a global scale that you can see from a satellite as far as destroying the earth. So likewise, all the rules about corruption are great rules, they're just not enforced. And so there's this dissonance between the stated reality and the official party line versus the human reality. But it's a complicated place to do business. There's also not historically a sense of honoring of law and contract and intellectual property, which is one of the big issues that American business people are facing right now.
Just want to make sure I understand, connecting the dots. Are you saying that the young people in Beijing, in business, were more enthusiastically interested in bringing their Christian faith into the workplace or figuring out how the two connect than versus American students?
I wouldn't go quite that far, because I think American students are very interested in this too. I guess more, as far as that particular question, I would just say I was stunned at how many, one of my translators, she was just sort of taking me from point A to point B, and she was a young student who comes from the country, and I asked her how it's going and chatting, and I said, so do you ever think about religious stuff? And she said, no, I don't believe in God. And I said, how about your friends? And she said, it's hard to say, but I know many of my friends who are Christians, and it's very important to them. And she sort of took it matter-of-factly. Here's what one person wrote me. This is the person who's Chinese who works for Nestle. He said, his English is very good. Dear David, thanks for the message you brought to the meeting. The topic of your expertise is very interesting to the young professionals and university students in China in this age. That's very interesting. This one talking about faith and is a very interesting message. It has been one of the most discussed topics among the people in my fellowship as well as the seekers. I'm looking forward to an opportunity, blah, 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 that they come in. So there's an openness to thinking and talking about these questions. Anything else in China?
Well, I just wanted to say there's a researcher in family history in China. Incidentally, my great-great-grandfather founded Peking University, so
he should have been giving us talk, not me.
Ministry. But there was an exchange between the minister of court and one of the Christian ministers where it went like this. The Chinese said, now tell me about this man you call Jesus the Christ. He says, yes, minister. He says, you say he's the Son of God. Yes, minister. He came down to save all mankind. Yes, minister. He said, well, answer me this. What? Why did it take them 5,000 years to find China? It kind of encapsulates the whole conflict between Chinese society and Christianity.
Interesting. In the interest of time, let me just sort of fast forward. I in Rome is another part of my journey, and this couldn't have been more different, but here's a little ethics case study. So what do you get out of the plane, I'm sort of the guest speaker, and often as you all know, when you're picked up somewhere, you're treated nicely. So I get out, I'm a little jet lagged, get out of the, said, just got back from China, and didn't know where I was. So I get out, and I go through customs, and there's a guy that says Miller, and it says AA flight number such. Yes. So, but they hadn't told me I was being picked up, but I was taking, so I was just delighted. So drive in, and about halfway in, I hear this guy trying to phone, and I don't speak any Italian, but I gathered there was a problem. He's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally says, "What's your name?" And I said, "Miller." So, "What's your first name?" I said, "David." And he goes back and forth and back and forth. Well, it turns out, Miller, on that same flight, like what are the odds, right? So they take me to the hotel. He said, well, should we go back and get it? He said, no, we're almost there. The company's going to send another limo to get this guy. So I go, so sit in the hotel, and then they told me how much they were going to charge me for limo. So no, I didn't order it. I mean, I'll pay whatever the taxi costs, but it's not fair to my client that they get, and I don't feel like paying it. It's your mistake, not mine. You don't check. And they say, okay, that's fine. We'll just charge you a taxi fee. So I'm then in the talk, and you know, whenever you give a talk to somebody, you kind of have a little something to tell them. So I start my talk before these gathered. There were sort of 45, 47 chief ethics officers from member firms all around the globe were coming to talk about ethics, what ethical issues they were facing. So I thought I'd tell as my icebreaker story. What would you do? You know, what would you pay? What's the fair thing? And then all of a sudden, one guy whose name happened to be Miller raises his hand. That was one. Turned out he's a terrific guy, and we had a good laugh about it. So that was, but here we were talking about how to think about ethics, and people were telling stories of senior executives or partners who had issues of racism, issues of falsifying work, so senior players, and how do you address these things, and do you go public about it, do you handle it privately, real business issues that they're thinking of. And to their credit, they're all talking about it very constructively and publicly. I'm going to talk another time. I gave a presentation on what I call 3 modes of doing ethics, and it has an overlay with the Christian way of thinking, but what I call preventative ethics, actual ethics, and restorative ethics. And another time I might give a talk on that. It's a new way of framing and thinking about ethics, and people seem to find that useful. So this is a little bit different than China, but this is where we had our meeting at our hotel. So I'm not going to do this because we're running out of time, but I do want to, this is up in Calgary, I might talk about that in December. But I would like to leave us with a few biblical verses. If we had time, I would draw them out, which ones you might think of. But I was trying to think of the theme and the motif is being on the road with these road stories. What are some verses? So I just did a simple word search of some text in the Bible with the road. And here's what jumped out, just taking it out of context, I realize that. But here's some Bible road stories. A couple verses from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures. Let us pass through your country. We will stay on the main road. We will not turn aside to the right or the left. So there is this pax romana, this opportunity to travel safely around the world. Another verse from Isaiah 2, actually. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make a straight road outside, make a straight road in the desert, a highway for our God. So how do we live lives that are straight roads, straight highways in these places that we're meant to work, whether it's in Manhattan or Greenwich or in Beijing? And also, pass through the gates, prepare the way for the people, build up the highway, remove the stones, raise a banner for the nations. The Christian faith is not an American faith. It is not a Western faith. It is a universal faith. Christ came for all, and remember, Jesus said in Christ or Paul, there is no Jew, no Gentile, no black, no white, no slave, no free. This is for all of us. And in some ways, we will probably be just like that young businessman talking about whether or not he should have a false light or all this part of it. I think I will be learning things from our young Christian brothers and sisters in other countries who are on the cutting edge of a pretty dangerous life sometimes. A couple New Testament verses. Again, the gates. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And then we enter through that. Or as the poet say, take the road less traveled. Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. As we wrap up, I invite you as you go along your road whether it's to your office in Greenwich, back home, or into the city. As you walk along your road, keep on the straight and narrow, bring the face of Christ wherever you go, and let it inspire and underpin your ethics. Godspeed, and we'll see you all next month.